Growing up in the suburban town of Wethersfield, Connecticut, in the late 1950s, the three children of Robbins and Meg Barstow became interested in the history of our country. Young Daniel wanted to learn about the Native Americans who inhabited this land before it was taken over by white settlers from Europe. Mary became interested in the American Revolution, when the colonists fought for and won their independence from Great Britain. David focused his attention on the future and the possibilities which rockets held for expanding human exploration into the heavens. So in 1954, we bought a large camping tent, which we used as a means for traveling around the country to visit historic sites and natural wonders during summer vacations, combining the fun of camping with learning about America's past and present. We thought friends and neighbors might be interested in our family travel adventures, so we took home movies of our trips and put on neighborhood movie shows when we returned each year. That was half a century ago. And now in the year 2000, when I'm 81 years old, I have transferred to video the 16mm movies which I took on all these summer camping trips, so that we could bring back some of those memories for our family and interested friends. It was really quite an extraordinary goal that we set for ourselves. We wanted to see parts of the country that we'd read about in magazines and seen pictures of and heard about other people going, but we knew there was no way that we could see the United States unless we found an inexpensive means of travel and staying overnight, which seemed to have as an answer camping, getting a tent. So we decided that we'd see whether or not we could make out as a family of 5 in a big tent. And the first couple of summers when we were involved in working out these plans, that's what we did. We tried out the tent to see if that was the way to go. We had moved into our new home in Wethersfield in 1951, just after Daniel was born, and for several years we enjoyed backyard picnicking and vacationing around home. But in 1954, we undertook a new approach to summer fun. Some friends of ours had gone camping in tents and found this kind of recreation to be both enjoyable and inexpensive. After considerable research, we decided to order a large tent ourselves from Sears Roebuck. The tent had to be big enough to provide sleeping quarters for a family of 5. It was an exciting family event when it finally arrived at our front door. We decided to try setting up the tent for the first time in our own backyard. And of course, everyone wanted to participate in the big project. We wanted to see how fast we could get it spread out on the ground, and then mounted on the tall 2-sectioned tent poles. The tent had a canvas floor and a mosquito net screen door in the front, as well as screened side walls for ventilation. We found that there was room in it for 3 single sleeping bags and 1 double bag to be laid out, as well as space to change clothes. So we went on our first tent excursion to a Connecticut public campground on the shore of Long Island Sound, where we shared common facilities with other campers. At Rocky Neck State Park, we spent several nights in the tent there, and we enjoyed days sunning ourselves on the beautiful sandy beach and being refreshed by the cool, salt ocean water. Daniel was just being introduced to the sea. And David had learned that it was easier to float in salt water than in fresh. We ate lunch in the nearest shade outside our tent. After this fun time in Connecticut, we decided next to venture further afield and go out of state to a public campground up in New Hampshire, which some friends had recommended to us. It was White Lake State Park. We set the tent up there among the trees, using the trunk of our car for a pantry and storage space. We camped out there for a whole week and found that families in neighboring campsites were invariably friendly and fun to share activities with. One night we had heard a noise and shined our flashlight on a masked visitor who turned out to have been a raccoon, as evidenced by tiny footprints in the dirt outside our tent flap. Before moving to Wethersfield, our family had lived in Niantic, Connecticut, where Robbins had taught school. Two of his former teaching colleagues, Ed and Jerry Randler, stopped by to visit us at this campsite, which was especially fun because Jerry had been Mary's first-grade teacher. On our way home from this trip, we enjoyed riding a ski-mobile up to the top of New Hampshire's Mount Cranmore, from which we had a fantastic view of New England hills and countryside. It was scarier riding the cars down than up. We also stopped at Benson's Wild Animal Farm in Hudson, New Hampshire, to view unfamiliar animals like this haughty camel, and where the children were able to experience the thrill of going for a ride on top of a huge Indian elephant. The following summer, we tried camping out on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, crossing the canal bridge and driving in our 5-seater car with a travel rack on the roof to Ronald C. Nickerson State Forest Park, located on the elbow of the Cape, where we had reserved a campsite, this time for 2 weeks. Meg had now made by hand a distinctive, colorful Davy Crockett jacket with white fringes on the arms and pockets for each member of the family. These special jackets became our standard travel outfits for all our camping excursions. We took great pride and joy in them. They served as an identifying family symbol and bond wherever we went. Our individual names were embroidered on the back of each jacket. Danny, David, Mary, Meg, and Rob. We set up our big tent and other camping paraphernalia, including a Coleman stove for cooking outdoor meals, in a nice wooded spot for an extended stay. As always, neighboring campers were very friendly and helpful, often sharing fruit juice and other refreshments. This was the year that Walt Disney's Davy Crockett television program was wildly popular, and all the kids wore coonskin caps. One story was that when Davy was attacked by a bear, his wife was afraid to take sides and just kept cheering both of them on until Davy, being played here by our Dave, finally was able to grin down Denny the bear. We used our campsite at Nickerson State Park as a base for a number of sightseeing side trips. We drove out to the sand dunes on the outer edge of the Cape and visited the Truro Lighthouse, near which there was a steep headland cliff overlooking the beach and the Atlantic Ocean far below. Meg made sure that the children didn't lean too far out over the edge. And then we got our bathing suits out and went down for a fun romp on the broad sandy beach and some cold water play in the ocean breakers. We were greatly impressed by the landmark Pilgrim Monument towering over Provincetown at the far end of Cape Cod. President Theodore Roosevelt had laid the cornerstone for this tremendous granite shaft in 1907, and we all wanted to make our way up the inclined walkway inside it to get to the top of the 255-foot tower, from which the parking lot looked very small down below. We had a dramatic view of the long wharf extending out into the harbor. And looking back, we could see bright blue water on both sides of the narrow hook-like Cape Peninsula. We enjoyed walking along the quaint, narrow streets of the old town, and at the very tip of the land, we noted the historical tablet marking the place where the Pilgrims first landed after their perilous voyage across the Atlantic on the Mayflower. On a later side trip up the coast of Massachusetts, we visited the town of Plymouth and examined the famous Plymouth Rock, designating the area where the Pilgrims finally disembarked in 1620 and founded the first permanent British settlement in what is now New England. We were particularly interested in the reconstructed house and fort here because our family is directly descended from a William Barstow who emigrated from England to Massachusetts in the year 1635 and must have lived in a similar setting. In Plymouth, we also admired the statue of the friendly Indian chief Massasoit, but we were reminded that throughout the colonial period, great harm was done to Native Americans whom the whites displaced. Back at our Nickerson Park campsite, in between outside excursions, members of the family enjoyed relaxing and reading comic books, lying on our unzipped sleeping bags opened up for a sunshine airing, or leaning peacefully against a tree trunk. One of our all-time favorite family books was Seabird, the story of 4 generations of a seagoing family, written and illustrated with beautiful paintings by Holling Clancy Holling, which we had brought with us this summer. Meg had painted pictures of whales and sailors taken from Seabird on the back of a shirt she had made for me, and this helped inspire us, before leaving Cape Cod, to take a trip on a large ferry from Hyannisport across the Sound to the island of Nantucket. While there, we visited the famous Whaling Museum, which was of special interest because some of our Barstow forebears in the early 1800s had been whaling ship captains and boat builders. Finally, on our way back home, we also stopped at the Mystic Seaport in Connecticut, where we were able to go aboard the authentically restored old whaling ship, the Charles W. Morgan. On the grounds of the marvelously reconstructed seaport village, there is a variety of buildings, including a small white-steepled chapel. Robin's late father, who at that time was a retired congregational minister, met us at the chapel, and later showed us around a sailboat belonging to a friend of his who also loved the sea. Well, we found that we really did enjoy this camping as a family, and we thought it'd be a wonderful way to travel without having all that expense and still having the fun. So what we did then was to develop this plan. It was a 5-year plan. I worked for the Connecticut Education Association then, and I had a 30-day vacation every summer, and we used every single one of those 30 days each of the 5 summers that we lined up for this trip. We doing a lot of studying on books and atlases and so on, the Parade Family Vacation Guide and books about national parks. We found all the places we wanted to go to, and we decided that we would try it in 5 different summers in this way. We would do New England, the rest of New England, we would do in the first summer. And that would be sort of short distances that we could manage. Then we thought we'd try driving out to the the north central states and the 5 Great Lakes. And then the 3rd summer, we would come down the east coast of the United States, get all the way down to Florida, and come over to Louisiana and cover the southeast that way. And then the fourth summer, we would go all the way to the great Northwest. That was a big, long trip, nearly 10,000 miles. And then we also, the following summer, 1961, and last summer, we did the great Southwest. So we had this goal in 5 summers to go to every single one of the 48 states. So that the kids, when they were asked in school or someplace how many states they'd been into, they could say 48. At that time, Hawaii and Alaska were not part of the United States. They didn't join until after we'd started in 1959. So we couldn't drive to them anyplace. But now this is the story of how we went about these 5 summers of family camping through 48 states. Our home base, of course, was our home right here in Wethersfield, Connecticut. And this is the place where we started all of our trips. (1957) was the summer that we started our 5-year plan, and we did New England, nearby New England. We started here at our home in Connecticut, Wethersfield, and we went up along the Connecticut River into Vermont and over through New Hampshire and up into Maine and over to Acadia National Park at Mount Desert Island. Then we came back down along the coast of Maine and through New Hampshire again and to Massachusetts, and then down through Rhode Island and back to Wethersfield. And that was 1957. We had a real sense of family purpose when we set out on this 1957 trip. We knew that this was the start of an adventure that would take us 5 years and many thousands of miles to complete. We now had a new Rambler cross-country station wagon, and with our camping gear loaded onto 2 car racks on the roof, we headed out to take in all 6 New England states. Our first major stop was in Woodstock, Vermont, to see the first Congregational church there. This was where Robin's minister father had had his first parish, and across the street from the church was the parsonage where on October 24th, 1919, Robin's Wolcott Barstow, Jr. had been born. After growing up in Hartford, Connecticut, Robbins had gone to Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, where he graduated in 1941. Returning to this beautiful campus with Baker Library overlooking the green, we went up to the small balcony outside the library tower for a bird's-eye view of the college quadrangle, the white-sided Dartmouth Hall, and the surrounding hills. Not far from Hanover, we sighted from a distance one of New Hampshire's most famous natural landmarks, the Old Man of the Mountain, also known as the Great Stone Face, a striking 48-foot-tall rock profile silhouetted against the sky on the upper cliffs of Profile Mountain, a giant nature-made sculpture. The high point of this summer's trip no doubt came on our 4th day out, when we went on an excursion to the top of the highest peak in the whole northeastern part of the country, Mount Washington, in the New Hampshire Presidential Range. We had the fun and excitement of riding all the way to the top on the famous Mount Washington Cog Railway, which was first put into operation way back in 1869. Pushed by an old-fashioned coal-burning steam engine, the passenger car proceeds up the mountainside on wheels and tracks protected with many safety devices, taking nearly an hour to reach the summit, which is 6,288 feet high and is almost always covered with clouds and mist. After a long drive through the interior woodlands of Maine, America's easternmost state, we arrived at our summer's primary destination, Acadia National Park, on Mount Desert Island, close to the port of Bar Harbor. We reached the Black Woods campground just in time to secure one of the last available campsites, and here, right in the midst of towering spruce trees, we set up our camp for a 2-week stay, our longest stopover at a single place. This time we had brought with us some large tarpaulins and clotheslines, which we attached to trees and our tent to provide an extended area of covered space for when it rained. It was a wonderfully relaxing place to be, whether preparing meals, carving wood, or riding a rocking tree stump. This was the first time we had stayed at a national park, and we were tremendously impressed with the many tours and educational programs led by uniformed rangers. From the top of Mount Cadillac, we could look out over the Porcupine Islands, extending in a row out into the Atlantic from beautiful Frenchman's Bay. We learned a great deal about natural history and ocean life from the rangers. Looking way down from the edge of Otter Cliffs, we could see that the deeper the water, the darker its blue color was. At Thunder Hole, the waves come crashing in and make a sound like the clap of thunder splashing spray high into the sunlit air. The children found it endlessly fascinating to examine the snails, sea urchins, crabs, and other saltwater sea life in the tide pools among the shoreline rocks at low tide, and our 2 weeks here went by all too fast. On our long drive home to Connecticut, we stopped at 2 historic sites in Massachusetts: Lexington, where the first shots were fired on the village green here on April 19, 1775, sparking the American Revolutionary War, and nearby Concord Bridge, where British troops were turned back by determined American patriots known as Minutemen, to honor whom this statue was erected. Finally, in Rhode Island, we had a hasty picnic lunch on Narragansett Bay to end our 1957 summer odyssey. 1958 was the year that we did the North Central states and the 5 Great Lakes. We started again at our home here in Hartford, went over across into New York State, up the Hudson River, and then all the way across New York to Buffalo and Niagara Falls, and then through a little part of Canada down to Detroit. And from Detroit we ran on up to Michigan to the top of the state and the Mackinac Bridge, and then over the northern part of Michigan and down through Wisconsin to Madison, and then we took a side trip up to St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota, and then on the way back we stopped in Milwaukee, and then we had to head home just as fast as we could to get home before the 30 days was up that year. And we did actually swim in all 5 of the Great Lakes, in Lake Ontario, in Lake Erie, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, and Lake Superior. This year we had a new piece of equipment, a neat little one-wheel trailer to carry some of our extra camping gear. Heading west, we crossed over into New York State and drove up along the Hudson River on the Storm King Highway, stopping en route to see the West Point Military Academy and, across the river, Franklin D. Roosevelt's home at Hyde Park. After camping overnight at Bear Mountain Park, we enjoyed visiting the Catskill Game Farm. It was an impressive experience for the children to see live giraffes for the first time. They also had fun learning how a baby elephant uses its remarkable trunk. Driving across New York State, we stopped in Rochester to see the George Eastman House of Photography with one of the largest photographic collections in the world. Then it was on to one of the world's greatest natural wonders, the incomparable Niagara Falls. The Niagara River flows north from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario and separates New York State on the east from the Canadian province of Ontario on the west. Midway along the river there is a tremendous double waterfall with a thunderous drop of over 160 feet. It is estimated that 164,000 cubic feet of water per second plunge over the combined falls. Goat Island separates the narrower American Falls from the giant Horseshoe Falls on the Canadian side. From Goat Island you can descend in an elevator to the base of the falls, where you are provided with bright yellow raincoats for a guided tour around the Cave of the Winds. Being enveloped in spray and mist while looking up from the bottom of the falls, makes this a really cool experience. After crossing the Rainbow Bridge into Canada, we went downstream a couple of miles for a thrilling ride in a cable car out over the Whirlpool Rapids, caused by the 40-mile-an-hour current running into a sharp turn in the narrow gorge. Then we returned for a ride down to the river's edge and a boat trip in the famous Maid of the Mist, getting yet another underneath view of this water wonder. Before leaving our Niagara campground, we took a closer look at the curved 2,000-foot crest line of the awesome Horseshoe Falls from the Canadian side, where 90% of the water flows over the fall. After this, we drove through Canada, across the southern part of the province of Ontario to Detroit, Michigan, and the nearby college town of Ann Arbor, where we were warmly welcomed by some old-time college friends of Robin's and Meg, Robert and Margaret Blood and their children, at whose home we stayed for a couple of nights while sightseeing in Detroit. In the auto capital of the world, we visited the Ford Rotunda Exhibition Center and were taken for a scary ride on the racetrack used to test new cars with steeply banked curves. We then headed up to northern Michigan and crossed one of the great engineering wonders of the modern world, the Mackinac Straits Bridge, 4.5 miles long, linking Michigan's lower and upper peninsulas. It had just been completed the year before. Further north, at Sault Ste. Marie, we were amazed at the giant locks of the Sioux Canal running between Michigan and Canada, and linking Lake Superior in the north to the lower Great Lakes of Huron and Michigan. At that time, these locks were the largest and busiest on Earth, passing an average of about 90 vessels a day, some of them giant freighters, raised and lowered from one water level to the other in about 30 minutes. Not far to the west of the Sioux is Hiawatha Country, where we took a short river cruise to the Tequamanen Falls, one of the sites celebrated in Longfellow's famous poem about early Native American life and legends. Our next state was Wisconsin, whose capital city is Madison. This is where Robbins had lived as a child for 6 years, when his father was minister of the First Congregational Church there from 1924 to 1930. We had the privilege of attending Sunday morning services at the church, which was still being served by the minister who had succeeded Robin's father, Dr. Alfred Swan. The Swans invited us for dinner at the parsonage at 21 Bascom Place in Madison, where Robbins had lived with his parents and 2 younger brothers until 1930. A giant statue of the legendary woodsman Paul Bunyan and his great blue ox, Babe, provided memorable images for us to take back from our overnight side trip to Minneapolis, Minnesota, the last of this summer's new states. Before heading south to Chicago and the long drive back east, we had one more exciting Wisconsin experience at the Milwaukee County Baseball Stadium, attending our first Major League Baseball game. The Milwaukee Braves had won the World Series in 1957, the year before, and in the game we saw, the Braves beat the San Francisco Giants by a score of 10-1. The Braves hit 3 home runs, including one by Hank Aaron in the bottom of the 7th. Aaron went on to become the all-time career home run leader with a total of 755 homers. Now, remember what I said about our having swum in every one of the 5 Great Lakes? Well, the water looked pretty much alike in all of them, so we positioned ourselves in the form of a letter, like M for Lake Michigan, to identify each one of them when we went into it. Here's O for Lake Ontario, E for Lake Erie, H for Lake Huron, and finally S for Lake Superior. We thought this was a pretty good record by which to wrap up our 1958 summer journey to the north central states. This was not really the end of our travels, so even though 1958 was the year of Zorro on Walt Disney's television show, we asked David not to leave this lettering behind us or even the Z he had made as the mark of Zorro. "1959 was our year for going south, and it was our longest trip yet. We added 14 new states to our list of having visited, plus the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. We started out as usual in our home here in Wethersfield, Connecticut, and on down, and we spent some time in New Jersey, and then we went on down to Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and on down through Delaware and Maryland, and on to Washington, D.C. After doing Washington, we went on down through Virginia and along the coast here to North Carolina, and then down through South Carolina and Georgia, and then Florida, the whole Florida peninsula down to the Keys at the bottom, and then back up through the middle of Florida and on across the Panhandle and through a little bit of Alabama and Mississippi and to Louisiana and New Orleans. And from New Orleans we went back up through Mississippi, Alabama again, up to Tennessee, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and then on up through the Blue Ridge Parkway in Virginia and through a corner of West Virginia and then to Pennsylvania again, and then home as fast as we could. We spent a lot of time getting ready for this extended 1959 trip. We had to learn a lot about station wagon living, because for 30 days our family of 5 would be cooped up in our well-packed station wagon for as many as 5 or 6 hours a day, traveling to all the historic and scenic places we had picked out to visit in the South. This was the year that hula hoops became a fad, and all 3 of our children found that swinging their hips around to keep a hula hoop from falling down was an excellent way to exercise in between long stretches of driving. In addition to the hoop, we took with us favorite books about the places we were going to, like Men of the Mississippi and Paddle to the Sea by Holling Clancy Holling. On all our trips, we liked to collect window stickers for each state we visited and for major attractions that we particularly enjoyed. And by this time, we were running out of space to put stickers on the side windows of our car. But each sticker brought back pleasant memories, as well as enhancing our anticipation of new sights to see. Finally, we were ready to depart on a journey that would take us a total of nearly 6,000 miles. Sightseeing south, with an average daily driving distance of approximately 200 miles, sometimes considerably more, sometimes much less. Our mode of traveling was for each person to take with them a small sack of personal belongings like books, papers, games, and extra clothes to keep with them in the car while driving. Meg and I occupied the front seat, and the 3 kids were in the back, rotating window seats on a daily basis. We had the trunk and roof of the car fully loaded, as well as the little trailer behind, and though I did most of the driving, Meg took the wheel a good share of the time. The first day, we drove all the way to Watchung, New Jersey, where we set up our new camping equipment in the extensive yard of the new country home of Meg's parents. We had no problem maneuvering the car to just the spot we wanted because the wheel on our little trailer would just reverse itself when we backed up and then revolve again when we started forward. Even driving over bumpy ground didn't seem to bother it. For this longer trip, we had developed a new system to make our many single-night stopovers easier to manage. When we arrived at a campsite, every member of the family had certain assigned tasks. The trailer served as our traveling pantry. It was carefully packed with a special place for every piece of equipment, including a portable stove, a folding metal table with little folding stools, which were Danny's responsibility, an ice chest, food boxes, and cooking and dining utensils. We had learned that for many people, camping is an end in itself. They like to set up a tent and stay in one selected place for several weeks or more. For us, however, camping was a means to an end. It enabled us to travel far and wide at minimum expense. We enjoyed camping out, but our primary objective was seeing new places and experiencing America's history and natural wonders. It broadened our perspectives to meet people in other parts of our great country and to learn what life is like in other places. Using a Coleman stove to cook on and a Coleman lantern to see by at night, we had a relatively easy time preparing for a nutritional campsite meal together, even after a long day's drive. Our sleeping arrangements this year were radically different. We had left behind the large, cumbersome canvas tent that all 5 of us had slept in, and that took so long to set up and dismantle. Instead, we had purchased a new kind of self-supporting, quickly assembled, dome-like tent called a pop tent. After fitting the ribs together and pressing down on the top to engage a central latch, you just lifted the tent into the air and pop, the bottom spread out to the width of its canvas floor. Meg and I had a double sleeping bag which we used comfortably in this handy zipper-doored little tent. For the 3 children, we now had worked out a unique system which enabled all 3 of them to sleep inside the station wagon. I had built a wooden platform to fit on the floor in the rear of the wagon. The platform contained 3 compartments, specially sized to hold the small individual suitcases which each of the children had for their clothes and other necessities. Each child also had an individual sleeping bag and air mattress, which we could unroll and pump up right in the car. In addition, I had built a companion wooden platform which, when the back seat was lowered, could be pulled over and dropped down to provide an extended floor space upon which to spread Mary and David's sleeping bags. We used a foot pump to inflate the air mattresses. Daniel was short enough so that when the back of the front seat was lowered, he could sleep crosswise there in his sleeping bag. So everyone was snug and comfortable, even when it rained. Sometimes, for one-day excursions, we would leave the trailer and tent behind, as when we drove down to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where a giant statue of the state's Quaker founder, William Penn, looks down from the top of the City Hall. In Philadelphia, we strolled past the famous Liberty Bell to historic Independence Hall, where on July 4th, 1776, representatives of the 13 original American colonies issued a public Declaration of Independence from Britain, inaugurating the 5-year Revolutionary War, which is celebrated every year with fireworks. Adjacent to Pennsylvania is the small state of Delaware, known as the first state because it was the first to ratify the U.S. Constitution after the war. During the war, the first American victory was achieved when General George Washington secretly crossed the Delaware River with his small army on Christmas night in 1776 to surprise and capture the Hessian troops in Trenton, New Jersey. We visited the crossing site with Meg's parents. We also visited the reconstructed wood cabins at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, where Washington's men suffered so much during the bitter winter of 1777 and 78. After Pennsylvania and Delaware, we moved on to Maryland and stopped at Fort McHenry, where during the later War of 1812 with England, Francis Scott Key was inspired to write the Star-Spangled Banner. You can see that it is still waving today. Then we came to the city of Washington, D.C., and after spending the night with some friends outside the city, we took a whole day touring our nation's capital, located in the District of Columbia, established as the seat of national government in 1790. We started with the Washington Monument, completed in 1888 and standing 555 feet tall in the middle of the mall. From its top, one can see, looking east, the Capitol building, where Congress meets to enact laws. Its dome was being renovated at the time of our visit, but we did get in to see both the House and the Senate chambers. Looking north from the monument, one sees the White House, the distinguished home of all our presidents, and open daily for walk-through visits by ordinary citizens like us. In 1959, President Dwight D. Eisenhower was nearing the end of his presidency, and though, of course, we did not see him in person, we were deeply impressed with his residency. Looking west from the top of the Washington Monument, we see the beautiful Lincoln Memorial bordering the Potomac River. To us, this was the most moving and meaningful of all, memorializing the Civil War president who was shot and killed in 1865. Above his statue are inscribed the words, "In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." Finally, looking south, we find the strikingly architectured Jefferson Memorial on the edge of the tidal basin, honoring the country's third president, Thomas Jefferson, who had sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against any form of tyranny over the mind of man. From Washington, we crossed the Potomac to the state of Virginia, where we paid a visit to Jefferson's marvelous mountainside home at Monticello. We were fascinated by its unique structural layout and by his intriguing household inventions. His self-designed tombstone identifies him as the author of the Declaration of Independence, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. We also visited Mount Vernon, the elegant Virginia home of General George Washington, who became the country's first elected president. Then it was on to Williamsburg, a fine restoration of the colonial capital of Virginia. It was here that the seeds were planted for the American War of Independence, when Patrick Henry cried out, "Give me liberty or give me death." Historically, we need to remember, however, that he was then speaking of freedom only for the white colonists and not for the thousands of black slaves whom they owned at that time. Not far from Williamsburg is Yorktown, where the final battle of the Revolutionary War was fought. Back in our hometown of Wethersfield in Connecticut, we had previously visited the historic Webb House, where Washington and the French General Comte de Rochambeau had planned the campaign ending at Yorktown in 1781, which at last brought victory and independence from Britain for the Americans. When visiting the site of this concluding Revolutionary War battle in Yorktown, we imagined what it must have been like first to see the British flag flying, and then to see taking its place the flag of the fledgling United States of America. The nearby Moore House was where British General Cornwallis surrendered to Washington. Continuing down the east coast to North Carolina, we admired the monument at Kitty Hawk, which marks the site of the Wright brothers' first powered airplane flight in 1903. In South Carolina, we stopped at Charleston, at the site where the first shot of the fateful war between the states was fired when South Carolina seceded from the Union in 1860 and shelled the federal garrison on Fort Sumter in the harbor. We rushed through Georgia after seeing a waterspout in the distance, which we were afraid might turn into a tornado. And then we were in Florida, where David in particular was eager to visit Cape Canaveral, the site of early rocket launchings. It was on July 29, 1959, that we visited Cape Canaveral, later to become Cape Kennedy. We could scarcely have imagined at that time that almost exactly 10 years later, on July 20th, 1969, 2 human beings from America would actually set foot upon the moon and then return safely to Earth from outer space. Because there was so much to see and do in the Miami area, at the southern end of Florida, when we got there, we found a trailer camp which we could use as a base for several days, leaving our tent and little trailer there while we went on one-day excursions in the car. We saw what the fabled Miami Beach resort area looked like and found a public part of the beach where we could go swimming ourselves. In the Atlantic Ocean, which still had breakers, but those waters were somewhat warmer in this southerly clime. We drove out to one of the Florida Keys at the bottom tip of the state, Key Largo, a low, sand-covered island with coral reefs in the water and interesting shells on the sand and rocks next to the lighthouse. Then we made an all-day trip to the Everglades National Park, looking for exotic birds and occasional alligators, as we made our way along the wooden walkway through the marsh. Outside the park, there was an alligator farm where a lot of them were penned up. And a trainer showed us how he could grab an alligator's mouth without getting bitten and without, apparently, harming the gator. Animal slides seemed to offer a popular diversion, not just for this small alligator, but also for this colorful parrot at another exhibition attraction called Parrot Jungle. It was fun here to have all 3 of the children provide perches for these 5 parrots all at the same time. These pink flamingos were a pretty sight. But the most exciting and dramatic place we visited in Miami was the Miami Seaquarium, where for the very first time we saw live performing dolphins. None of us had ever seen so beautiful and graceful a creature. We were absolutely enthralled at its skill and obvious intelligence, whether leaping through a hoop, ringing a school bell, or playing basketball. The dolphin seemed to like the cheers and applause we gave it when it succeeded. We learned that these were bottlenose dolphins captured in ocean waters off the coast of Florida. There, this time he made it. Viewing the dolphins through an underwater window with a diver and some giant sea turtles, we could see how they used their flat horizontal tails to propel themselves through the water. Indeed, their tail strokes were powerful enough to send them leaping out of the water up into the air several times their own length. Dolphins like these have frequently been observed in the wild, leaping high above the ocean surface, and their trainers here had encouraged them to extend that natural behavior by rewarding them with fish and other positive reinforcements. Their incredible coordination demonstrated a high level of intercommunication. Now here is Smiley, at one time the highest leaping dolphin in the world, thrusting itself 21 feet up into the air. Then I had the unforgettable experience of actually playing deck tennis with a dolphin. I threw this little red rubber ring into the water, and the dolphin used its beak to throw it back to me. I threw the ring in again, and the dolphin again returned it. It was an interspecies game. After Miami, we drove up through Central Florida to Cypress Gardens, where the southern belles in their colorful gowns were as beautiful as the many varieties of flowers. Cypress Gardens is famous for its water ski show. We had never seen anything like this, and it was quite a sight. These skiers start out in tandem and end up in a human pyramid, carrying the flag of the Southern Confederacy in what they called a salute to Dixie. This is a miracle act, a man skiing only on his bare feet. Watching the high jump was a thrill, and slow motion makes this three-man jump even more thrilling. Watch the man in the middle. He almost doesn't make it, but does end up okay. The final act was the dramatic kite-flying ride. Up, up, and away. The next state we stopped in as we headed west along the Gulf Coast was Mississippi, where we enjoyed another saltwater swim with breakers, this time in the Gulf of Mexico, near the lighthouse at Biloxi. We reached the western end of our southern journey when we arrived in New Orleans, in the state of Louisiana, where the Mississippi River reaches the sea. In this old world city, we were impressed by the exceptional iron grillwork on balconies and fences, which we learned were largely the work of blacksmith slaves. This is the War of 1812 battlefield, where the Americans fired their guns and the British kept a-comin' till they were almost totally wiped out by the small army led by Andrew Jackson here, who later became president. Heading homeward finally through the state of Alabama, we were upset to see signs of segregation, with separate restrooms, drinking fountains, and lunch counters for whites and blacks. That direct experience led our family to support the civil rights movement to end racial discrimination, and 4 years later, in 1963, the March on Washington, led by Martin Luther King, Jr. Our first stop when we reached the state of Tennessee was spectacular Lookout Mountain, overlooking the Tennessee River and the city of Chattanooga. During the Civil War, this was the site of the famous Battle Above the Clouds, a decisive engagement in which Union forces stormed to the top of the mountain and dislodged the Confederate forces, causing them to retreat back through Georgia to Atlanta. A visit to the Great Chickamauga Dam helped us to appreciate the far-reaching significance of the Tennessee Valley Authority, which President Franklin Roosevelt had set up during the Depression years of the 1930s to bring rural electrification and flood control to this whole area. Then a visit to the American Museum of Atomic Energy at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, enlightened us about the beginnings of the dangerous new atomic age we had entered at the close of World War II in the 1940s. Crossing over into western North Carolina, we visited a reconstructed pioneer village which was the setting for a tragic play called Unto These Hills, dramatizing the forced expulsion in the 1830s of 20,000 Cherokee Indians from their mountain homes along a trail of tears 1,000 miles to Oklahoma. We stayed for an extra day at a campground in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in North Carolina. We thought that the rarefied atmosphere of this mountainside site would be a good place to practice our outdoor cooking skills, so each of us took turns at flipping pancakes, with mixed results. This is David, and here's Mary. Uh-oh. It appeared that Danny was able to flip his invisible pancake so high up into the sky that when it came down, he couldn't avoid having it land on his face. As we traveled north on the beautiful Blue Ridge Parkway, we enjoyed stopping at Blowing Rock, where unusual air currents keep light objects blowing upward. We followed the parkway into western Virginia and drove through the Shenandoah National Park on the Skyline Drive. These magnificent roadways extending along the crests of mountains for hundreds of miles are the longest highways in the world, designed purely for recreational motoring. We had tremendous views looking down into deep valleys on both sides of the highway. Our one stop in West Virginia was at Harper's Ferry, where the abolitionist John Brown had tried to free some slaves just before the Civil War. Then, back in Pennsylvania, we stopped to visit Gettysburg, the site of the Civil War's most decisive battle and the turning point of that great struggle. In one of the most terrible and tragic battles ever fought, in July 1863, the Southern forces of General Robert E. Lee, in a desperate charge across this bloody field, were finally turned back by the Union forces with a horrendous loss of life on both sides. In all, more than 50,000 men were counted lost in this one three-day battle. It was here on November 19, 1863, that President Abraham Lincoln delivered his famous Gettysburg Address, praying that from these honored dead, the living may take increased devotion to the cause of one nation, under God, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This was a sad but significant piece of America's history with which to conclude our 1959 journey, and that's the end of part one of these Barstow family camping trip videos. Part two will take us up to the great Northwest and the great Southwest, and that will be in the next tape. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed reliving these experiences with us. Take care and give thanks.
We hope you've enjoyed this Barstow travel adventure film. We'll be releasing more of Robin Barstow's home movies on this YouTube channel during 2021. Click here to subscribe and receive the latest updates. Meanwhile, enjoy these other films by a master of home movie storytelling in the pre-digital era.